On. There we go. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, get going here then. Going to talk about
Thursday, I tell you.
going to talk about cities, which is something that's absorbed my life for the last 10, 15 years, I suppose, at this time. And when I worked on smart cities, one of the criticisms of that area was, or the question, pointed question I used to get once in a while, which was where are the people? And it was true. We were just pushing technology, and the people were kind of incidental to that. And when I retired, it led me to start thinking about, well, where are the people in this story? And that's something I have been pursuing ever since. And I would have been spending most of this year working on this. I spent a lot of time in the last 2 or 3 years on this. However, something else got in the way. So this is an incomplete story, framed mainly as a series of questions here. And I'm going to be talking about this idea of winning hearts and minds for Pivot, because that's how I see we need to influence the people in the story here. So we know what the problems are. We can go into great detail on that. And we, Pivot Projects at least, believes that we can develop solutions to those. We also believe, perhaps over, hopefully, that we can persuade people to adopt our solutions. That remains to be proved, but we'll give it a good try. What we don't know is how to get the public, man on the street, the man on the 73 bus, to really buy into this and start a strong movement to force, to encourage, to demand the adoption of these kinds of things. So that's what this is about. How do we win our hearts and minds? This is what I'd like to take you through. We'll talk about scale in systems, which is something that we haven't surprisingly ever covered in our systems thinking here. Some background on where did cities come from and why we live in them. What is the role of information technology, in fact, and how do we leverage these things? So a question of scale. It is typical in systems thinking to have in mind certain aspects of scale. That could be space, could be time, could be other dimensions. And to recognize that there are, for any given scale, there are things that are above and there are things that are below us. So in this kind of space, at the scale of 1,000 kilometers in many years, we've got things that are national or international. We've got the scale of 10 to 100 kilometers in months, 2 years, which is where I see most of the Pivot projects focused. We've got what I'm talking about today, which is the scale of the man on the street. Call it 100 meters or so, call it minutes, up to a month perhaps. And then there's personal space, the stuff that goes on in my head and stuff that I do is not generally publicly visible. So we are talking here about a scale then of 100 meters to 10 kilometers, the size of a good fraction of a city, minutes and months here. Start with the question of why do we have minutes? Why do we have cities at all? And there was a time before we had cities. And this is a real cartoon. I didn't make this one up, but I thought it was quite striking when I came across it a while ago. So in the beginning, let's go back 20,000 years or thereabouts, we were nomadic. We herded animals. We killed wild animals when we could. And it was a period with a relatively unstable climate. And then round about 10,000 years BC, we got into a period of very stable climate, which has lasted to this day, although we now seem to be destroying it. Where we were semi-nomadic, we were learning how to grow things as opposed to simply hunting and gathering. And soon afterwards, the notion of settlements developed. It's hard to do agriculture if you're going to wander off after a couple of months. And people began to develop these settlements, developed more productive ways of doing agriculture, started to accumulate things. They could produce more food than they could eat. now we need a place to store it. That may also constitute wealth in a certain area. And so we progress into walled settlements, evolving into cities with not just agriculture, but crafts and trading among cities. And we can find historic evidence for many of these in the area around Mesopotamia. Um, Getting on into biblical times, we begin to see industry, manufacturing things, banking, money exchange going on in the origins of religions and philosophy. Um, Walled cities lasted a fair amount of time. They were valuable because they stopped people robbing you and killing you off. But eventually, as Western Europe settled down, we started to see unwalled cities, um, much more open, allowing growth, allowing ready access to both in and out, and the societies themselves becoming much more structured here. Big cities began to emerge. I was always fascinated or puzzled why Mexico City is such a big, important city until I read a book called 1493, where it turned out Mexico City was a point of exchange between merchants bringing porcelain from China to miners bringing silver from South America. And so you get beginnings of national, international trade going on, and so on, and so ever much bigger in the coming years. So cities did a lot for people, still do. They allow this accumulation of wealth and the storage of that wealth. They allow defense, not so much with walls these days, but other mechanisms. The idea of power, of law and order and justice and structure, political structures emerges in these things. We get infrastructure, kinds of things that Pivot Project is really very much interested in. But many other things start to emerge as cities mature until we get the one truly wonderful organizations that have emerged in the world in the last couple of millennia here. So they do lots of things for us. And I will talk a lot about the fact that they offer opportunities. People migrate from the countryside into cities because you get more opportunities, many more things to do, people to meet. Um, and that's attractive. People come in to seize these opportunities. And the fact that they come in makes the city bigger, and that adds to the number of opportunities. This is one of the origins of the nonlinearity that Jeff West and Luis discovered in the last 20 years or so. But how does it all work? This is the question. What makes the wheels go round was another way of expressing this. How does it come that without sort of centralized management and orders issued, that these things actually, these gears mesh together and produce such productive cities? Well, here's a familiar picture to those of us who work on pivot projects, showing a kind of system map of a small part of what can constitute a city. And these lovely curved lines that join up the dots in there, we call them edges, and they express interactions between different entities in here. And we assert that these interactions exist. But we have never, to my knowledge at least, asked the question of, but what drives those interactions? What makes those interactions function and operate? And my answer to that is, that's people. This is what people do in cities. Yeah, it's nice to abstract it into an edge, but in fact, those are things done by people that cause those actions to take place. So here's my take on the Kumu maps. These things are driven directly or indirectly by people interacting with one another or with the environment or things acting on behalf of people. And I will be calling that kind of interaction, or what the people are doing there are actors as we get into this. So if we abstract a city to a simple picture, we see interactions between people and organizations, represented here by infrastructure. Organizations can be actors. They have agency. They're able to do things they want to do. And cities, infrastructure, there's interaction between those entities as well. And this is what I think of now as the life. This is the question I was trying to get to the heart of, is what creates the life of a city here. So actors are entities having agency. What are not agents, or actors rather, are pieces of equipment. A bus is not an actor. A bus acts on behalf of a transportation company, and the transportation company is an actor. But there are elements of the urban environment that are acting on behalf of these other actors. And that brings us to the problem I'm sure you've seen before of an ant colony, where you have hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of ants, who are not the most intelligent of creatures, nonetheless manage to operate what is a very sophisticated environmental system, and deal with their births and their deaths, and getting rid of the rubbish, maintaining temperature, and so forth. How does that happen? How does the tiny intelligence of a million ants add together to form a complex system like that? So let me give you a different illustration, just to show how little interactions can add up. Here is our friendly planet, Saturn. And Saturn, you know, is surrounded by these rings, which are lumps of rock that are gradually accumulated over the millennia around this. And it looks from a distance as if this is a single plane. But in fact, each of those things, this is like looking at a gramophone record. Each of those is a well-defined track, but they're not spirals as in a gramophone record. And they emerge from the interactions, gravitational interactions, mainly between the lumps of rock. That doesn't mean they bang into one another, although I'm sure that happens, but simply the gravitational interaction between things weighing a few tons here and there. And provided a rock is circulating in an appropriate circle, it can stay, it's stable, it can stay in that. And those orbits are known as the solutions of a thing called the Hamiltonian, which I will not show you, but it is a way of applying classical mechanics to very complex systems of this kind. So here's another complex system. I don't actually know where this is, but my argument about this picture of people milling about, apparently chaotically, perhaps, is to say this is not chaos. These people are purposeful. They are there because they decided they needed to be there. Perhaps they're selling, perhaps they're buying, perhaps they're just looking around. But this is not chaos. This is purposeful. These are entities, people acting with agency here. This is what chaos looks like. There are no systems in that picture. Well, not in the foreground anyway. The systems were destroyed when the tsunami came ashore and wiped out not only the people, but also almost all of the infrastructure that was there. And that land is more or less useless. A lot of it was farmland, but it's useless because of the salt that was brought along. But even so, that will go after about 10 years. It will rebuild. And perhaps other systems will emerge here. But at the moment, there is no system present in that foreground. So this is what I've been trying to understand, how those things emerge, how they interact, and in particular, how can we influence them? In the case of Saturn, you had this gravitational interaction between lumps of rocks. In cities, you have something that I'll call social forces at work that determine why each of those people is there and what that person thinks he or she is doing. My posit then is that these social forces are the interactions between the actors, and that these interactions are always bilateral. That whenever I get something, I have to give something, or whenever I give something, then I expect something back. So they are mutual interactions between two, possibly more actors here. But how do I decide to do that? Why do I do that kind of thing? Well, I'm trying to satisfy my needs and wants, and this is what cities enable me to do. They produce enormous numbers of opportunities, and I can buy a cup of coffee any time of the day or night or so. I have lots of parks to sit in and walk in. I can buy lots of different stuff. I can go to work. I can hire people to work for me, perhaps. So the city is a solution to a lot of needs where I have something to offer, I need to find someone to take it, or I need something and I have to find someone who can give it to me, again, in a bilateral relationship. So what the actors do then is they make choices among these many, many opportunities that are offered by a city. And those, what I call social forces, are actors making choices. This is what those edges in the Kumu map meant, right? That there are actors making choices and driving the interactions among those entities there. So that leads to the question of how do actors make these choices? How do they decide what to give, what to buy, what to do? And what is it that they're trying to achieve in this? And that brings me to another diagram that I'm surprised I've never seen yet on the Pivot um, project, which is Maslow. I've heard Maslow mentioned, but we've never seen it even on a single slide here. I hope everybody's familiar with this, but this is a hierarchy of needs that Maslow developed in the 1950s, I believe it was. Beginning with the absolute physiological needs that I have in order to stay alive, and advancing over time to, as it says, self-actualization, the higher needs at the top of the pyramid. Pyramid does not represent wealth, by the way. Maybe the bottom layer or two represents some progress from absolute poverty into minimum needs. But Maslow gave us this model of the things that drive us to do certain things, to go out and get a job and earn money so I can buy food. The desire to apply my creativity in some constructive way. And I'd really like to see us thinking more in these terms in pivot projects. I think of the city then in terms of four environments in which these actors play, what I call the natural environment, the ecology, the geography, the climate, the animals and birds, and the air and the water. On top of which we have the built environment. One of the things that Pivot Projects cares enormously about, naturally. Sorry, telephone's ringing here and I can't stop it. The information environment, which in the 21st century has seen a lot of change, and that has some relevance here. And then finally, the social environment. This is where we find the actors. The actors are interacting among themselves, drawing upon information that they receive through the information environment, and on a stage that is built by the infrastructure on top of the natural environment. Now, the information environment is arguably one of the main reasons that we have cities. When you cram 30 million people together in a relatively small space, the information flows are absolutely amazing. And we didn't need digital technology for that to happen. The marketplace, the town square, the church, all of these were venues where people have congregated now for thousands of years, and information has flowed. In the 21st century or late 20th century, we've added to existing methods such as mass publications, the radio, the television, this notion of digital communication as well. And that, of course, is where smart cities has played a role. So human needs have driven these information flows. And I'd argue that is the basis of how we make our choices in cities. Where can I find food? When will the bus come? The development of higher value skills like refining metals or weaving. And as we add more and more technology in that space, and the flows of information increase, how will that change how we do those things? Already we can see how it's changing. The radius of cognition, by the way, is a topic I think I published on a little bit there. The notion that when an event occurs, that the information generated by that event propagates in the city. And in historical times, it perhaps propagated, a few tens of meters, and perhaps it reached the other side of the city after hours or days. But today, with information technology, that information can propagate at light, at almost the speed of light. So I come back to this question of how do we make choices here? Those two lower layers provide us with opportunities to the extent that I actually learn about these things. I'm sorry. My choices will depend on where I am in Maslow's hierarchy. What is my need? What is it that's driving me at the present time, or needs? It's also constrained by this notion of structuration, which Peter Williams pointed me to, and I wanted to spend a lot of this year studying this. The city shapes behavior. The physical infrastructure shapes where I can go, how I can get there. The government, town governments, shapes what I'm legally allowed to do. My wealth limits what I can afford to buy. So there are constraints in here that limit what I can do. Culture as well, a big influence. So these are some of the forces that push us into making choices. So come back to my original question here. If we had understood the set of mechanisms that I've run through, I know very quickly here, how could we help actors make better choices? And by better here, we mean sustainable, resilient, fairer. How can we win hearts and minds in that direction here? Well, rational arguments have been tried for a long time, and that hasn't worked terribly well, we have to say, on this. There are pockets of people like pivot projects that are passionate about these things, but it clearly hasn't motivated the public at large here. Current example that I was discussing just earlier in the week is about, well, I guess they're all going to end up being very narrow in sense, but anyway, vaccination hesitation, people who don't want to be vaccinated. Polls suggest that maybe 30% of the United States population would not use a COVID-19 vaccine if it were available. And the professor we were talking to pointed out that nonetheless, people do occasionally change their minds. How does that happen? And in the discussion, we ended up suggesting that, if to the extent that such things happen on social media, we have the evidence to try and find out what it is that causes those flips to occur, those pivots even to occur here. And if we could do that for vaccination, how could we apply that to climate change and responding to that? So this is we're getting to the end here now. We have some pressure here. We don't have a lot of time. It would be nice if several billion people started to think along these lines. And how do we get them to adopt this? There's some constraints on this. It's not just time. We have to deal with lots of different languages. We have to deal with not just 100 people in the Pivot Project, but billions of people. We have to find ways that Maslow's hierarchy is not going to go away. How do we replace the old bad solutions with new green, sustainable, resilient, fairer solutions here? It's got to go very fast around the planet. And so it had better have some existing infrastructure. To me, that sounds a lot like something that will happen through the internet, but who knows? I was just on a call earlier this morning with Ian Richardson, talking about citizen assemblies, where governments, in some cases, will defer to non-elected groups of citizens, somewhat randomly selected, to go through deadlocked issues. A recent one was the decision in the Irish Republic to permit abortion, and it seems like if one could begin to develop citizen assemblies that think in these directions, this might be an attractive way. Another one, though, is could we make a game out of this? Instead of calling it monopoly, we could call it panopoly. That one's maybe not quite so serious, but we have to start thinking about how are we going to influence these billions of people in a relatively short time here. So this is back from the very beginning of the story here. We may have a few ideas about how to go after this. And I'm hoping that pivot projects will become a generator of some of those ideas too. And that is, oh, okay, summing up. Cities are driven by choices made by their inhabitants. These choices follow patterns. Those patterns, to some degree at least, reflect the aspirations of the inhabitants. And we need to find these ways to influence hearts and minds into a sustainable direction. And that is then the end. So,
Colin, I have to drop. Could I make one comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Peter. I'm sure it'll be a good one.
And apologies for jumping to the head of the queue. One of the things that I've used with smart cities a lot is, and you might have seen it, is this thing that I call a U-shaped model. Mm-hmm. Where down one side of the U, if you can visualize it, you've got government to citizen. Across the bottom of the U, you've got citizen to citizen, and back up the other side of the U, you've got citizen back to government. Way too many places are much too interested in the first dimension. I first put this thing together in the context of disaster resilience, but it applies, I've come to the conclusion, in a lot of other areas as well. And one of the, as we're thinking about strategies for doing that, for influencing people, as you were saying, we need to think about all three sides of the U. It's not just stuff that government can tell people. It's not just stuff that people can figure out between themselves, and it's not just stuff that people are going to be telling government. It's all of those.
Yeah.
Just we need to keep those three dimensions in mind. That's the only point I wanted to make.
Sorry to lose you. You always bring a lot of wisdom, Peter.
Well, sorry and all, but I'm just crazy busy at the moment.
Good. Really stay out of trouble if you can.
Very cool. I look forward to hearing the outcome of this.
All right, very good. Alan, is that wave? You're on mute.
That was a goodbye to Peter.
Ah, okay. So, Ian, your session this morning was very timely. That's why I asked for the the name of the citizens group.
No, it's fascinating because it's unlocking the citizen. It's where, for me, the rubber meets the road, and things can get done. Otherwise, it's just talking. That's right, and pivot projects set out with the notion that we actually want to make change on the ground. Yeah, we'll do some talking along the way, but we really do want to see change on the ground.
I'm going to invite us now to unmute and share video and enter into a conversation. And my question to all of you is, what did you hear? And what questions do you have for Colin? And then what one thing could be done as a next step? What did you hear? Questions for Colin. And what one thing might help in the pivot?
I'm happy to go.
Peter.
Thanks, Colin. That was wonderful. It was really really rich, and was a great sort of framing of a thought process, which I know is what you hope to do. So thanks. It was really wonderful, and it's unleashed a whole lot lot of sort of experiences and thinking in me. And a couple of them spring to mind. One is that I know from some experiments and changes in cities, like Singapore particularly, that the process of peer pressure, in other words, to be as good as someone I know, or even better, is a very, very powerful change mechanism. Been proven many times to work. And one of the ways to trigger that is through kids, through children, who actually get very upset if their parents are not keeping up with their friends' parents. And in Singapore, that worked really well in changing the behavior on water consumption. They actually changed water consumption. They reduced it by 25%.
Good Lord.
Through a process of education and publishing average consumptions that were going down. So that's one sort of area which is a really interesting part of the subject you presented, really. So maybe I'll just leave it for that, because I've got a few other thoughts, but that one I think is quite a useful one.
Well, interesting you point to children. I've just introduced a friend in Oslo to Alan. This is a Norwegian lady who writes children's books, and she was asked some years ago by teachers in Norway, could you write books for children, the early years, let's say, first 5-6 years perhaps of children, that introduce them to notions of the environmental sustainability and so forth. And she has duly produced a series. It's based on something certainly well known in the UK, to some degree in America, a series of books from the 1930s, I think, about Thomas the Tank Engine and his friends, a group of steam engines. But she has recast it around, I think it's called the Trash Yard Gang, a group of trash carts. And I've just introduced her to Alan to see whether this can fit into the education stream somehow. Alan.
It definitely can, and I'm really interested in following that up this week. Regarding the global goals and young people, I couldn't get UK schools in my neck of the wood to actually put it into the curriculum. So I ended up volunteering into the Cubs and Scouts. And the leaders were saying, how do you get an 11-year-old coming up with this? And I said, because I've released their mind and they're safe. They can't fail. I'm not going to say you haven't got the answer. This is what I need to tell you. So following our conversation on Monday, when I said I really feel we've got to get it from universities down to primary, I spoke to the local group that I belong to and said, if I get these professors to come to you, how about getting the youngsters between 8 and 12, putting forward something on water, something on energy? So that led me to talking to Richard in York, and his son's into the Cubs. So we're going to see if we can get them talking and create some mini professors. Yes, Deborah.
So Colin, or rather Alan, you'd want to look at the Eisenhower program that sends middle school kids all across the globe, because they often will connect around water projects, and it would be a great way to move it collaboratively and just, plant seeds.
And I think that's what Pivot Project needs. It needs to be attached to other people's work, to not own it, but be part of it, to constantly see your name up in lights, because this project is doing that work. We feed off of it rather than saying we are the light and the answer. We've got to connect these nodes and edges that around the world are doing their own thing to find out how we can make a stronger movement.
So
Yeah, well, perhaps we could start to build lists of movements that we want to influence in that way.
oh, that would be fun. I want to know from Marianne and Cliff and Sandy, what have you heard in this conversation? And what questions and thoughts?
Okay. What I've heard is that people are moving to cities. But what we're seeing in reality is people are moving out of cities. And if people are moving out of cities, then because they're able to do that, because technology is flowing everywhere, and they don't need to be so close to other people to share information and whatnot.
And diseases.
So if that's the case, then that could lead to people being isolated or developing their own ideas as being true when they may or may not be. So that was one of the things I was trying to rationalize in my mind as to how do you rationalize people, these cities that are places where people can exchange ideas and grow when people are not congregating there. So that was one thing that I had a question on. The other thing was that people don't like to be told what to do. And I'm probably a fairly good example of that, sometimes to my own detriment. But in any event, it seems that the government needs to provide some kind of structure for these things to happen. They don't necessarily have to tell you what to believe, but they do need to provide a structure so that the collective intelligence can be shared, and then people can take the information and get these ideas and the positive ideas and move them forward. So that's just kind of an idea.
I enjoyed thinking about cities this way, and people moving into them for new opportunities. But I often find I'm motivated by fear. And it would be interesting if the Pivot Project could pick out one city and model what's going to happen if 100,000 people move in or 100,000 move out. And also to try and put climate change in terms of simple things that people can understand. Like right now, we think of climate change as, oh, the temperature will go up 1 degree and we'll get 1 more inch of seawater. Well, maybe you need to talk about COVID as a result of climate change, or, just tie in when you have these huge fires and millions of trees are burned. What's that going to do to the immediate environment in the next, lifetime, in the next 5-10 years? And just put it out there as, maybe put the models out there for people to experiment with themselves. But I like the idea of working with kids and scouts, and, maybe we have an opportunity with older people too, who are retired. But I think the idea here is do something, do many things, and just let the information get out there and try and see what happens.
Ian, is it am I right in thinking is it your email is for my children? Is that yours? You're on mute.
Our children's lifetime. I sat down with Our World in Data a number of months ago and was horrified about the emission curves and the relationship with global temperatures. We've been a very lucky generation, or I have, in a sense, in the last 40 or 50 years, and the use of fossil fuels to, well, effectively pull the rug out from the planet. And my children, our children, are going to have to resolve the issues. Hopefully with our help. Well, I did make a presentation the other day to the RSA, and some of the old people in the room felt that actually they'd done their bit and the youngsters should take over now.
It's a nice thought.
Which seems like handing over the burning baton. But
yeah.
But that's education and awareness.
Yeah. Paul?
I'm going to try and answer Deborah's questions a little bit. What did we hear? I heard a big blind spot that is not insignificant. It's obviously one of these questions that all of humanity could think about, and we might not necessarily come up with an answer in a very short time. But it is a human connection blind spot. So that leads to my question for you, Colin. Where on Maslow's hierarchy do you think is the biggest point of leverage? Or is it multiple points? Would it be at the bottom? Would it be somewhere in the middle? Or would it be all of those levels?
I think it changes over time. I think at the moment it could well be, quite close to the top. But as the climate deteriorates, you eventually you're going to end up right down at the bottom, right? Is there food? Is there water? Maybe that's the picture that conveys that. Is that?
I'm not sure about that. Doom and gloom doesn't seem to be working, and we've had plenty of opportunity. We've beaten that horse, to the point where people don't listen anymore. But I agree. It's going to eventually become more visceral. It's going to become more immediate for people.
Mm-hmm.
Time. I also wanted to say that I think the internet will be essential, because that's what differentiates this world from all of the other worlds that have gone before us, is that we now have this massive connection possibility, and somehow the internet will be a vehicle for that change. I posted on the chat something called the natural step, which probably everybody has heard of before. It's a bit of a remarkable story about this cancer specialist from Sweden, and he was a Swedish karate champion. Anyway, a very influential physicist that began the natural step not long after the publication of Our Common Future in Sweden. And if I don't have it, I haven't read the book actually, if I don't have it wrong, I think a pamphlet was delivered to every household in Sweden at some point explaining what sustainability was, to try and get everyone on the same page. So it's a model worth looking at.
Great thought, great link. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm back. My other meeting was cancelled. One of the things that I've observed from the disaster resilience and such is nothing really succeeds in getting people's attention like a good disaster. And I think we should shamelessly ambulance chase every time there is a drought, every time there is a hurricane, every time there is a tornado. We append the messages on the back of it. Simple as that.
I think to pick up on that, I think we need to make sure we don't waste a good pandemic.
Precisely. Yeah, never waste a good crisis. Exactly right. I mean, yeah. We're seeing it in California again right now, right? So it's shaping up to be a drought. It's La Nina year. It hasn't rained here since, and I'm not even in the driest part of the state. It hasn't rained here since April, I don't think. And it's, there's no snow, there's no nothing. Attention will come back to water shortage and water conservation and all of the things that should have happened years ago. Just as it came back to it last time there was a drought, and then it waned when it started to rain. And now the rain's gone away again, at least temporarily. Attention will come back to it, and people will use that to make to deliver additional messages to people. And I just think that's the natural order of things. People focus on what's, on their most immediate experience. And if their immediate experience can be a teachable moment for us, then we should do it.
So Gamma has something to add. I'm not sure if it's related or not, Peter.
It's not necessarily related, but I just wanted to share my own takeaway from Colin's presentation. And I want to zoom in on the aspect where he spoke about people's needs in this collective space where they find themselves in, such as cities. And it got me thinking that a lot of people actually go to their graves with their talents never having been used.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often people think about what they're looking for, and yet themselves, they have so much to give, something that someone else is looking for. And this resonates with me because of my biomimicry and looking at ecosystems, how they function. In the wild world, there is no monetary transaction happening. And yet the trees put out fruits and the leaf and the flowers put out nectar. And even if you are unable to produce fruits or nectar, if you are a herbivore, you leave droppings of fertilizer to boost the ecosystem. So I'm thinking with the age of AI and all this, it should be easier for everybody else to put out there what they can offer, not necessarily selling, even if it is a barter trade. But I'm thinking we are at the cusp now of being able to put out there what we can fit into the ecosystem, so that as we get what we are looking for, others also find it easy to get from us what they're looking for. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Gemma. And Damien next.
Yeah, going back to your questions, but before I do that, just another question, and I don't mean to be facetious about this, but would it make more of a difference, Peter, do you think, if it was conservatives that were burning and facing drought rather than liberals?
Well, often it is conservatives facing drought. Certainly in the Midwest, they're prone to drought. It's conservatives in Florida that are at risk of sea level rise and hurricanes. Yeah, no, I don't go with that argument at all. I think the misery is politically evenly distributed.
Good. The things that jumped out for me in come back to Deborah's question was the blind spot did really ring true to me. The other one was the story, and I go to it myself. So the story of our sort of 200,000 years of evolution, and we've about 10,000 years or so of sort of civilization or living in larger clusters. That period from the advent of agriculture around 10,000 years ago to the walled cities of sort of 8,000-9,000 years ago, there was only a handful of generations that brought about that transition. And yet within 1,000 years of a 200,000 year evolution, within 1,000 years, politics, law, most of the key trades, guilds, all of the fundamentals of society had emerged. So there's something really interesting about how quickly things can change for an adaptive species like ourselves. The other thing that after you spoke was when Cliff talked about people don't like to be told what to do. And I think that's kind of ringing in my ears in the middle of all of this, in the middle of the current time that we're in. And we have a model that talks about the difference between engagement and empowerment. And it's a simple 4-step model. It starts with what's the situation, why is it important, or what's the vision, what's the sort of problem statement. And engagement is what, why, how, and who. What's the problem? Why is an issue? What's our plan? And who do we recruit to execute our plan? That's engagement. It has to be rolled out all the time. You have to continually engage and sell the plan over and over and over to people. Empowerment flips the second two. Empowerment is what, why, who, and how. And empowerment is where, when you've identified the problem statement, then you recruit people and you help them figure out what to do about it. And that, I think, is the key flip that we need to be doing here. We need to be providing our tools and our expertise to people on the ground to make the changes for themselves, not telling them what the changes have to be, not coming up with a model or templates, frameworks and structures and infrastructure to help them get to grips with it if they so wish to use those frameworks. But all of our collective intelligence will only really drive the change that we need if we get it out to people way beyond the cities and right out to ordinary people, so that the people who don't want to be told what to do are told, well, you figure it. Here's the vaccine, you go figure it out. And everything that they figure out, they will sell as their own to their friends, their neighbors, to other people like them. We need to get the tools out there and then help the good news stories to go viral on a global scale. If we're really going to win the hearts and minds, you don't win the heart through the mind, right? In fact, it might be the other way around, but certainly you got to give people the chance to do it for themselves, because if you try to tell them, I think that's been the big story of the last 48 hours. I think that's the big problem with the left. We're trying to tell people what they should think, why they need to be educated, when they will cop on, when they'll get smart, when they are people, they're as smart as they're entitled or they want to be. And we need to empower them to do stuff on their own, in their own backyards, in their own living rooms, in their kitchens, in their vehicles, in every aspect of their life. And we are in a race to get that out there as quickly as possible.
Damien, thank you. I'm going to have James and Sandy speak, and then Colin gets the last word.
Thank you very much, Colin, for a wonderful presentation. As always, that was really informative and appreciated. Just a reflection upon the presentation. When talking about moving to cities for opportunities, this is very much in the UK evidence that I've seen firsthand, is 18-year-olds move to cities for education, for university education. They complete their studies in the city environment, and then more often than not, they can't seek further opportunities within the cities. They have to move back to their hometowns with their parents. And you're getting a demographic of 18 to 25, sometimes even 18 to 30, which are going to university, perhaps sticking around in the built environment city, working bar jobs, or perhaps concentrating to London to work bar jobs or BS office jobs. And I don't know if this is a modern phenomenon, but how is the built environment, the city, going to be disadvantaged by this demographic which is constantly being recycled every 3 to 5 years, and these young people aren't allowed to get a graduate job, contribute to their city, grow with it? Is it just a city's just going to stagnate with an aging population as young people disperse and can't find opportunity?
Goodness. On before you respond, because Sandy's gonna bring something else into it, and then we'll have you finish up.
Okay. One thing that it's actually Cliff, not Sandy.
Oh,
no problem.
Okay.
One thing that I have not heard, one word that I have not heard is hope. And I firmly believe that people need to have some kind of hope in order to be motivated. So just throwing that out there.
Good thought, Cliff.
And now, Colin, to you.
Well, I guess this has worked. I wanted to drag the attention of the pivot community onto the need to take some action here. I don't know what the action is, but we've had some good suggestions that we can explore. I like the idea, I think it was from Alan, and maybe Mary Ann, of finding existing organizations, because we don't have time to build new ones, that we can use as channels. I very much take Damien's point. Was it Damien? No, Peter's point that people don't like being told what to do. I never did. And if we can just get some minds thinking on this, I mean, I think few organizations, collections that Peter and Rick and I have contributed to bringing together here. I think there are few organizations that are better positioned to think about how do we put the people in the picture here.
Absolutely.
We are at
Maybe.
the top of the hour. So those who want to linger a little bit, please do. But I also want to honor that there are things that call all of us. So those who need to go, thank you so much for coming. And Colin, thank you. It was fabulous. And we'll be posting this on the general channel for those who are in Slack.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Debbie.
Thanks, Colin.
You too.
Yes, thank you, Colin.
See you later tonight, Cliff and Sandy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
see you tonight.
Bye.
I just wanted to make the point, Colin, or just sort of surmise a minute. What if we take a distinctly 20th century concept of a marketing campaign, a full-blown marketing campaign, and think through, you know, a really effective marketing campaign for think through the model of some product that has gone viral, or think through the model of some social movement that's gone viral or something, and just figure out what that would get us and what it wouldn't get us towards answering your problem. You know, I'm not sort of at the kind of hidden persuader level yet, you know, I'm not sort of trying to channel my inner Vance Packard yet, but at the same time, there are some marketing campaigns that are stunningly effective. Maybe we could find a couple of examples and just analyze what they did and what we learned from that, and what would we still need beyond a marketing campaign if we did that.
And you know, when I mentioned this lady in Oslo, she's got some nice ideas, and you know, television is full of beautiful, beautiful videos. David Attenborough's latest production, and one that I've seen recently about learning from an octopus. They're fabulous creations, but you know, that they may not be the broad audience that we're looking for here.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Most people can't relate to that, sadly. Or don't want to relate.
One thought, Colin, is something that happened in London, where we had a framework for changing London to a more sustainable city. And we sat around saying, how the hell do we get the Londoners to actually change? And we thought to ourselves, there's probably individuals and families trying to do stuff out there. You know, there's a massive diversity in the city. There's probably somebody trying to do something. They're probably trying to stop plastic bags being used. They're probably trying to set up a little green restaurant. They're trying to do their bit. Why don't we actually get their stories and help them implement it? Just give them a bit of publicity, a bit of exposure to say, this is that if everybody did this, this would be part of a very big picture.
Yeah, make it visible. Yeah.
And what we did was we actually produced a little video of their ambitions and what they wanted to do as a collective vision of how city could change. And we did it straight away. And as soon as we identified these people and you know, got them introduced by the mayor, we then made a video, and it was a fantastically mobilizing thing. And these people went on to be successful businesses, and London changed, and all sorts of myriads of change started to happen. So that people really like that. I think the idea that individuals can change things.
No, I think it has to start at ground level. I think big organizations are not going to do this.
So that's something we could practically do, I think.
Yeah. Do you have a link still to that video?
Yeah, it still exists, the organization. It's called the London Leaders Program.
London Leaders Program.
It's still on I think it's still on the web.
Maybe that lead to the National Leaders Program, because I know there's a Leaders Program in the Pennines.
Yeah, I think it may have done it. It caught fire from that very simple idea. And it's all about diversity and motivation and encouragement, and there are people trying to do a lot of the stuff that we believe in, but they can't do it because they're lost in the.
Maybe we want to create a practical handbook of stuff we know works from what we've seen elsewhere. Just pull it all into one place, and you know, ideas for mobilizing your community, mobilizing yourself and your community.
Yeah, Scott could do that for us, I'm sure.
Just a sort of a handbook. Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, it's the kind of thing that Ian I'm sure Ian has a lot of examples of things that he's led in that kind of way. But that's the kind of leadership that you could also then take to organizations like the Scouts.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's actually illustrating how these things fit together into a bigger system.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it
You
very
get it in
powerful.
school curriculums as well.
Alan, was that a hand?
Yeah, that's just an apology. Hairy grandsons turn up for the Last Supper before they go into lockdown.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I've got to go too.
Very good.
Well,
Thanks, Colin.
there's still hope on this side of the pond. So
Yes.
Take care. Thank you, Colin.
Take care.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.